Hello, Marvel fans, comic geeks, and all the nerds in between. My name is Megan, and today we are going to talk about the finale of X-Men 97 Season 2. It is Episode 9, and it is titled Survival of the Fittest. We have gone through a lot this season, and I'm very excited to tell you my thoughts on the finale. I have a lot of thoughts on it, so buckle up. So, we're going to have full spoilers, so if you haven't watched it or you hate spoilers, come back once you're ready. The first season of X-Men 97 absolutely blew every expectation I had out of the water. It gave us all the nostalgia we were hoping for, and then decided, you know what this needs? Even more deeply weird mutant lore. Luckily, years of the MCU, the Foxverse, and all of the other superhero-related projects we've acquired over the years had prepared audiences to accept pretty much any comic book content thrown at them. So, once we got Season 1 of X-Men 97, I think we are all living on this high of seeing something so fantastic, so beautifully done, and something that sang to our X-Men loving souls. More importantly, Season 1 fully embraced the mutant metaphor, reflecting the rise of reactionary politics in the United States through stories about governments and individuals who hate mutants simply because they exist. Season 2 has occasionally followed that same path, especially with the Nightcrawler-focused episode Strangeland Savage Heart, which is probably one of my favorite episodes. But for the most part, Season 2 has moved away from political relevance and toward spectacle, superhero melodrama, and increasingly enthusiastic amounts of people punching each other in the face. Which makes the finale, Survival of the Fittest, very fitting, because it mostly consists of mutants beating the ever-loving crap out of other mutants. But I do think we will get back to the familiar themes of the mutants living in a human world, given the post-credit scene, which I'll also get into. As we saw last week, X-Force and X-Factor have teamed up, with Cable and Val Cooper convinced that Gambit is still a threat, even though Xavier and Rogue managed to pull his consciousness out of Apocalypse's control. Now, the X-Men have to take on both teams after they storm X-Corp headquarters with a SHIELD helicarrier and an entire army of Sentinel Squad 1 fighters. Meanwhile, Rogue, Beast, and Nightcrawler head into Apocalypse's ship to see if they can figure out what's going on. Once they reactivate ship, it reveals the Celestial Shrine, the same mysterious object that En-Sabah Nur, who is Apocalypse, entered to become Apocalypse back in the Ancient Egypt episodes at the beginning of the season. Naturally, Rogue decides to walk directly into the terrifying cosmic death chamber, because I'd expect no less. Despite the very real possibility of being corrupted, Rogue enters the shrine and comes face to face with the celestial Isan, the Searcher. Isan sees just how determined Rogue is to save Gambit, including her willingness to actually throw hands with a celestial, which was wild, and decides to reward her with an absurd amount of power. Temporarily, of course, because there is a catch. Rogue has to sacrifice herself once the threat is dealt with, because cosmic power always comes with terms and conditions. That contrast between the mutant-on-mutant brawl in the episode and Rogue's eerie encounter with Isan basically sums up what Season 2 has done best. Throughout the season, there's always been a very interesting juxtaposition between different characters' stories that are very different, that kind of give you whiplash when the scenes change back and forth, but in the best way possible. The big fight is essentially a giant playground for everyone to show off their powers. Strong Guy and Bishop absolutely wreck each other while absorbing one another's kinetic energy. Morph transforms from Wolverine to Dr. Octopus to distract Psylocke and Archangel, giving the actual Logan an opening to attack. Cable shoots at Jean's force fields while using his telekinesis to yank Cyclops' visor around. It's ridiculous, it's excessive, it's extremely comic booky, and for the most part, it really does work. Rogue's encounter with Isan, meanwhile, goes in completely the opposite direction. The background music, the sound effects, that all drops away, leaving only the characters' voices, which is very eerie, very surreal, which themselves sound kind of flat, but not really flat, but more avoidant of emotions when they're talking to each other. But it's a celestial. Are they supposed to have emotions? No. Tiny Rogue floats in front of Isan's enormous face, making Jack Kirby's already abstract design look even more alien thanks to the sheer difference in scale. everything is blasted with saturated white light, which this was a beautiful scene. Was it pretty scary because you're just watching it and it just feels so much larger than life, but it was a beautifully handled scene. There was a lot going on in it, and you could see that Rogue was willing to give literally anything, even her own life, to save Gambit. And then Rogue starts coming apart, and I have to say, having her skin pulled away was wild work. Wild work. The sequence appears to call for her to disintegrate as she challenges Isan, and the animators depict it with layers of skin peeling away to reveal red underneath. It was even more horrifying than it sounds, but it made my stomach kind of do a little flip when I said it out loud. It's just, It's beautiful, it's surreal, and deeply unpleasant in exactly the way a giant cosmic being should be. Then the episode gets to its climax. Cable tracks down Gambit and shoots him in the face, which is just so Cable. Cable is absurdly powerful, but for his whole life, his mutant psychic abilities have been used to keep his techno-organic virus from spreading all over his body. So his first reaction in a situation where he needs to fight is usually to automatically shoot. So this made sense. Everyone is understandably horrified. Well, except Apocalypse, who's apparently having a really great day. Gambit's death finally gives Apocalypse enough power to take control of his body, creating a horrifying Remy/Apocalypse hybrid that really, I tried to come up with names, and all I landed on was Gambapocalypse, but I will also accept Gambin Sabanur. That's all I got. Let me know in the comments if you have a better one. Almost immediately, Gambin Sabanur transforms the mutants into new X-Men because that's something Apocalypse can just do now. And then Rogue arrives in her new celestial armor and squares off against him. And then the fight lasts about 3 seconds. That's it. Rogue basically walks up, yanks Apocalypse's essence out of Gambit, traps it in a gem, and then hands the gem to Cable like she's returning a set of car keys. The showdown looks fantastic, but the resolution was way too quick. It undercuts the fun of the episode's earlier battles, and worse, makes the stakes feel almost non-existent. Not just for the episode, but for a lot of the season. Apocalypse felt genuinely terrifying when he destroyed Magneto earlier in the season with a smile on his face. Gambit was incredibly threatening in the previous episode. Here, though, Apocalypse becomes a minor inconvenience who gets handled almost immediately by Celestial Rogue. And I understand, she's a Celestial, I get it. But can we all just agree together that this could have been even spaced out some? The same problem affects Cable. The first 4 episodes spent a lot of time establishing him as the son of Cyclops and Jean, or who he is as a character, or why X-Force is even a thing, or what his main goal is in life, Ascani raising him to take out Apocalypse, right? And the previous episode did a really good job developing his relationship with his parents and even during a conflict. Even the big fights between X-Men, X-Force, and X-Factor don't have quite the same impact as the battles from earlier episodes. We got, arguably, 3 of the most iconic X teams, besides, New Mutants and all that. But X-Men, X-Force, and X-Factor all fighting together, that should have lasted longer. A lot longer. But anyways, as a result, Survival of the Fittest feels less like the grand conclusion to Season 2 and more like the X-Men 97 running through a greatest hits album. That becomes especially obvious when Xavier finally argues with Apocalypse about his Survival of the Fittest philosophy. Apocalypse believes Earth can only survive the Celestial's judgment if the strong eliminate the weak. Xavier argues that survival comes from caring for one another, even when that means sacrificing yourself. Which was foreshadowing. The idea makes perfect sense for these characters. The problem is that the speech doesn't have nearly the same weight as Ensabad Noor's vision earlier in the season. And it really doesn't reflect Xavier's grief or growth after Magneto's death. It doesn't address the moral questions raised when Nightcrawler defended Great on Creed. It doesn't really grapple with the different philosophies of X-Factor and X-Force. And it doesn't even hit as hard as Xavier's final words to Apocalypse, where he praised Ensaba Noor's mother for abandoning her child, which was a diabolical thing to say, but we like it. Instead, all of these complicated questions get boiled down to a fairly simple moral argument that mostly exists to stall time until Celestial Rogue shows up and saves everyone, which makes the final scene feel cheap. Like, it really did feel like he was just talking because he knew Rogue was coming. And when she showed up, it was like, okay, 3 seconds later, Apocalypse is in a gym. That's really where it was. Like, I'm very happy to have Gambit back. I truly am. But, like, this whole thing with Apocalypse and his horsemen could have been its own season. We didn't need... I mean, X-Factor could have been its own season. X-Force could be its own season. They should be their own show. Really. We should get an X-Force show. We should get an X-Factor show. But I don't work at Disney or Marvel or any of those places, so I can't tell you what goes into making these shows. So, of course, there was the big part of the episode. Of course, Nightcrawler is going to sacrifice himself to save his sister. That's completely in character, and when Kurt returns to Isan to repay the debt Rogue owes, it's genuinely beautiful. His faith, his love for Rogue, and the closing montage showing the X-Men living happier lives because of his sacrifice all land so perfectly. And it's Nightcrawler. You can't tell me there's one bad Nightcrawler scene. This was different. This was something that truly shows who Nightcrawler is as a character. And I think that was handled beautifully. But let's be very honest here. We all know the Marvel rule. No dead body, they're not dead. We did not see him die. We did not see him disintegrate. We did not see his skin get pulled off. I can't even say it. I can't do it. We didn't see any of that. So, can we all just agree that Nightcrawler's coming back? Just like Magneto. They'll be back. Out of that, it still doesn't answer the bigger questions about evolution and survival that the season raised through characters like Magneto, Great on Creed, or Isan himself. Ultimately, Survival of the Fittest is a fun episode. It looks fantastic. The action is great. And there is plenty of excellent character moments. But X-Men 97 has shown that it can be so much more than that. Even season 2 has spent a lot of time asking interesting questions about power, survival, morality, family, and what it means to evolve. The finale mostly brushes those questions aside in favor of a bunch of cool fights and a giant celestial rogue. That's not nothing. It's still so much fun. It's still such a fun season, such a fun finale. But after everything the season set up, I was hoping for something that felt less like a greatest hits reel and more like an actual evolution. And I don't know, guys. I feel like we're not going to get that in season 3 either, because I want to say season 3 is done. They're just cleaning it up for it to release next year. It's season 4. I want to see all of this slow down. I want to let these episodes and the stories marinate. I want to sit in these stories and appreciate them in their entirety, not just the highlights of them. So I don't have too much hope that the pacing in season 3 will be better, but season 4, I'm really hoping so. We can't talk about this finale unless we talk about the mid-credit scene. Val Cooper, or who we think is Val Cooper, is in an office watching as Great on Creed wins the election as the president, which is a problem. That's a big problem for the mutants, and I'm excited to see where that goes. She's also looking at mutant files of someone we've all been asking for, Mystique. This is interesting because a lot of people theorize that Mystique was Val this whole time. I never thought so, because I was always of the mindset that Wolverine could just smell it wasn't Val. There's a comic series that goes along with the show. It was a prequel series, X-Men 97. And in the X-Men 97 season 1 comic series, it's shown that I don't remember who he was smelling. Wolverine was smelling someone, and I thought he was smelling Val. And I was like, oh, she's Mystique. Confirmed. He smells, that's what's going on. And then it wasn't Val. He smelled something else. And that's when I realized if Mystique did take over for Val, Wolverine would know. But it didn't happen. Anyways, real Val walks in, gets shot by fake Val, who is actually Mystique reading her own bio in the files. It's the equivalent of someone Googling themselves. That's what it felt like to me. And we finally have Mystique in the mix. Now, who wants to bet that Mystique masquerades as Val to get close to her son, who is now the president, Great on Creed? Because he wasn't in this season for no reason. Maybe he was. There's no way. He's president now. Something's crazy's got to come out of that. So before I end this, I do have some final thoughts about this episode and this season. In this episode, I really liked how in Nightcrawler's Sacrifice, it showed the X-Men living peacefully, like with them at the school, Polaris and Bishop in a picnic, and Colossus painting a picture of him and Ileana. It gets ignored a lot, but Colossus was an artist in the comics, and seeing him use those talents to grieve was really sweet. The next one, Bishop and Polaris. What are we doing? You teased us enough. You can stop fishing. You already have us hooked. I want to see them together. I want to see this relationship grow. I like them together, and I find it very interesting that the relationship between Havoc and Polaris was very ignored, which I like. My girl deserves better than Havoc, and I'm not a Havoc hater, which I found out recently that there's a lot of you guys that really hate Havoc. I just think he could be used differently. Next one. And this is one that sat with me for a couple episodes now. At least 2 episodes. Why was Magneto's death ignored? Like, Professor Xavier was a wreck about it for a few minutes in the next episode, and it hasn't been addressed again. I feel like that was a huge thing to happen, but with how quickly the stories have been speed ran through, the stakes didn't feel as high, and the big moments didn't feel as big. Sure, I think he will absolutely come back, but you have to think in the first season, we mourned Gambit. And that scene with Wolverine getting his adamantium removed by Magneto lived in our heads rent-free until this season dropped. It just wasn't impactful, and I truly think that's the pacing's fault. Out of the whole second season, my biggest issue is the pacing, and I've been very open about that. The animations were beautiful. The voice actors did an incredible job. And seeing so many X-Men related characters is something that makes my past child self extraordinarily happy. But the pacing is what's making the big moments feel so much less impactful, like Magneto's death. It happened, Charles was in his feelings for a few minutes in the next episode, and then nothing came of it. It wasn't revisited, and honestly, there were a couple points where I just forgot it happened. As I said, I feel like we were going through the X-Men comics' greatest hits rather than watching these stories play out. This is probably my only complaint, though. I want to see the stories I love from the comics in live action play out, and that doesn't mean I want every single detail or every single issue to be brought to life. I just want to see them as a complete story. With the storyline Inferno, for example, that could have easily have been a full season, if we're going with short episodes and less than 10 of them. But it was an episode or two, a couple. I just think it's doing an injustice to these stories that we've all read. Some of us have read over our lives, and things that there are ways that we became very familiar with these characters. And I just don't understand the point in rushing through them the way you are. Of course, there's going to be some people who say it's because they didn't know there was going to be a next season. It's because they didn't have the money to do it. I get that, but we also can't assume that's the reason. None of us know. That's why I'm asking the questions, because no one knows. I don't know. I'm just airing my grievances. And I understand. I truly understand that we are lucky to get these shows because it took so long for us to get it after X-Men the Animated Series. But we're also allowed to have our opinions. So to those who have commented on my post telling me to shut up and be grateful, with all due disrespect, no. people can have their opinions without being accused of being a fake fan or told to go read the comics. Because let me tell you, I have read the comics, and that's why I feel like I'm pretty qualified to have these opinions. And even if I didn't read the comics, if you're watching X-Men 97 and you're a fan of these characters, you're an X-Men fan. You can have these opinions too. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But yeah, it was a good season. It was. But I just think X-Men 97 Season 1, while the pacing was fast then, nothing compared to now, I think it showed that they can do better. That the show can do better. The people writing the show can do better. And I'm not going to get into if it's because Beau DeMayo is gone. I don't know if that's the reason. I have my own opinions of him, but we'll never know why, unless the only person who speaks for Marvel in the entire world, Brad Winderbaum, comes out and says something. Which, given the Beau DeMayo stuff, I feel like, take it with a grain of salt, because there's a lot of things he can't say. I just hope Marvel and Disney listen to the fans, because I know I'm not the only one who has issues with the pacing, and I know I'm not the only one who knows that they could do better. So I said a lot there. I'm very sorry. So that was my review of the finale of Season 2 of X-Men 97. Thank you for following me through this whole season. And whenever the next season comes out and the next one, I will be here to review it. Hopefully it's more positive, because I hate reviewing things I have a problem with. I hate it. I like talking about things I like, things I'm excited for. But I did like the season. Whatever. I'm getting into it again. Never mind. So with that being said, be sure to like and subscribe, and have a marvelous day.